Hello, I'm Ronald Gold, and this is Gay Alternatives, a weekly show about the variety of ways, both traditional and experimental, that gay women and men are attempting to live their lives, about the ideas gay people are using to work out these personal lifestyles, and about the things these ideas and experiments might mean for the future, not only for those who define themselves as gay, but for women and men in general, for the society at large. One major problem for the society at large is the fact that we live in a patriarchal culture, one that has demeaned and despised women as something less than whole, independent human beings, one that has assigned roles to both men and women which deny all of us the opportunity to discover our individual identities, and one that has made it difficult, perhaps impossible at this time in history, for women and men to relate to each other outside these assigned roles. It is in this cultural context, I believe, that we can find the background for today's discussion on the subject of lesbian separatism. My guests are Jan Crawford, convener of the Feminist Community Coalition, Carol Hardin, and Doris Lunden of Lesbian Feminist Liberation. I'd like to begin by asking what the term lesbian separatism means to each of you. Does it mean complete economic and social isolation from men or from heterosexual society? Is it the choice to relate on a close interpersonal basis only with other lesbians, or is it somewhere in between? Anybody like to begin?
We were talking about that the other
Carol?
night, and one thing that came out of it was we liked changing the terms a little to lesbian separating and becoming complete. And I like that a little better because it shows that it is a process, and it's not a thing that's, this is lesbian separatism and this is how it's always going to be. It's a process. Women are getting away, and they're going away by themselves, and they're understanding things about each other, hopefully, and they're finding some things out. And if you keep on thinking in that process kind of way, this isn't the way it's always going to be. This is the beginning, and there's going to be, a middle, and maybe there's going to be an end, but maybe there won't be. Maybe it'll be growing in circles.
Well, where in the process are you, particularly right now?
I think it's very hard when you're in a process to define the process, to explain it.
Thank you.
In some ways, I see it as lesbian separatism, in my experience with it, as something that I never decided intellectually. It was something that I went with my intuition, and it's freed my intuition. I am able to listen to my inner feelings about things and believe them in a lesbian community in a way that I haven't been able to do outside that community.
What, Jan?
I agree about the process, that it's very difficult to, on a linear line. In fact, it's impossible, and linear thinking is male anyway, in my view. So to say that I am at this exact place where, one, I am not associating with anyone but lesbians would be impossible, because one of our conclusions is that we all are in the patriarchy, and that some of us are moving further and further to what Mary Daly would call the periphery of the patriarchy. And some of my actions are very much out on the periphery, almost toward the invention of a life that isn't as touched by patriarchal conditioning. And others of my actions are clearly reflect my internalization of the patriarchy. To be less abstract, if I can, I'm going to have to go back to work in a couple of months, wherein I'll find myself clearly right smack dab in the heart of the patriarchy. And I'm in the process of trying to decide, to the extent that I can, what my what kind of attitudes I'm going to reflect there. In some ways, the point is, am I going to use my energy to reveal the contradictions of the patriarchy? If I'm on a job as, I used to be in advertising, but if I go back to work in, let's say as a secretary, am I going to call people at every moment on their sexism, or am I going to use that energy more to create a woman's culture outside of my job? Ideally, I would like not to go back to work, number one. I would ideally like to spend the next several years at least of my time only with women. That's impossible. So I have to make compromises all the time. And beyond the compromises, I find myself making occasional choices to relate to certainly some straight women, And one of our feelings when we talked the other night, and when we're saying we talked the other night, we're referring to a conversation that Carol and I had with another woman named Elizabeth Shanklin, and some of these ideas, it's hard to say where they came from. Some of these are Elizabeth Shanklin's ideas too. And that is that it's endemic in a patriarchy that men and women are separated, somewhat along the lines as you described in your opening remarks about, is it possible for men and women to relate to each other under a patriarchy? That even in a family, a very traditional nuclear family, there's a considerable amount of separatism in that family, with the mother relating usually more to the children, often now the girl child sometimes more than the boy child. And she certainly wouldn't say that she was a separatist, or certainly a lesbian separatist, but that the structure of a patriarchy, which builds contempt between men and women, has, as one of its prerequisite, separatism between men and women. I personally I think that all women are in the process of separating from men. And 99% of women would say you're nutsy. But if you begin to look at, if you watch people out, let's say at a restaurant, the women are always talking to the women and the men are talking to the men. And the woman may not have had a conversation with her husband of any value for years. She wouldn't say she was a separatist, but in fact, the patriarchy is very clear in those relationships, which is that the woman can talk better with and relate better with the other women than she can to her husband. So when you ask for a definition of separatism, I'm more interested in the definition of the separation between men and women. I'm not so much a lesbian chauvinist, I don't think, that while I find some relationships with straight women difficult, I'm more interested in the separation between men and women versus the separation between lesbians and straight women. And we don't talk about celibates either, who I feel very close to in terms, very often, their political analysis, women who have chosen to be celibate, is very much like mine. So I wouldn't be a separatist with celibate women. And any woman who's in the process of finding her own strengths is a woman with whom I want to have a bond with.
Well, you talk about the traditional ways in which men and women have separated out from each other by talking more comfortably with each other, but the traditional notion of the way women have talked to each other in the past is, we talk about the housework and the assigned roles of women and the kinds of things that we do, and the men talk about the important things. Surely that isn't the kind of way in which women that you're associating with are talking with each other, and I just wonder what some of those things that you are talking about that are different from that traditional way of women talking to each other are.
I think that I enjoy talking to women about periods and housework and things like that. I work with a lot of straight women. Almost all of them are straight women. And I like conversations like that. But women, it's that kind of stereotyping of conversation that men always talk about important things and women always talk about trivial things. Women do talk about important things, too. But there's a mixture of things. Men don't always talk about important things.
Oh, I'll attest to that.
But as far as that, I think that's sort of...
I don't think men ever talk about important things.
Well, to them, they are running the world, and they're talking about their techniques of running the world, which are, semi-important because part of our survival depends on it. To them, if we're taking things in what you feel is important, yeah, I guess so. I think it's kind of irrelevant to the whole subject, though. What men talk about and what women talk about, that's been sort of gone over and over and over. One thing I wanted to get back to, and I hope we do before this is over, is when Doris was talking about trusting her intuition. And I'm very interested in that because that's something women are talking about now that they used to be kind of ashamed of, and which was woman's intuition. It's been made, like a trite kind of insult for women, through the years. And I think a lot of women are beginning to trust their intuition and to call it more than just some kind of animal instinct. I think they're beginning to give it a little more importance. It's not some kind of instinct that we're going back to. It's something we're going forward from, that we're building on. And I think the movement certainly uses intuition a lot. The individuals in the movement, I don't think the movement's endorsed female intuition yet, which they should, right off the bat, number one.
We'll have a now resolution.
But I think, right, I think individuals in the movement have been using it more and more, and I think all the breakthroughs, the really fantastic breakthroughs, like Elizabeth Gould Davis have been intuition. Hers was founded on research, and certainly
I find
some kind of
that my political beliefs come from intuition, that I have the intuition first, that I have a gut feeling about something, and I can't really argue it or discuss it because I don't have any intellectual understanding of it. But I find now, after a number of years in the movement, that this instinct is never wrong, that I can trust it and that I don't have to intellectually be able to even explain it to anybody. I go forward with it. Eventually the explanation comes.
Isn't it going into bigger and bigger things now? Did it start off with smaller kinds of things, and then when you noticed it, hey, I had a feeling about that, and then I suddenly noticed it and it was right, and then it went on so that you started looking for that kind of intuition?
Yes.
Right, yes, that's a real growth.
Well,
I've
had similar kinds of experiences myself, and so I'm just wondering whether this is something that is a property of women, or is it something that women are beginning to use more as they relate to each other more?
I think it's being encouraged in certain areas because, in fact, I'll have to get onto my bandwagon for a second. There is a whole movement within the feminist movement now called spiritual feminism or cultural feminism, which is a reconnection of women with, well, let me start from the fact that patriarchal religions have been very painful for women historically, and so many women have cut off that part of ourselves that deals with intuitions, that deals with undefinable kinds of things, and we've been political women who go and lobby for Intro 2 and do all kinds of practical political kinds of things, and have had to leave big hunks of ourselves closed off because the reopening, the words like religion and spirituality and intuition and whatever have always, that realm has always been used to exploit us, or the Christian religions have been used, or other religions have been used to exploit us. So it's one of the most important things that's happening in the women's movement is a very gradual exploration of that. And when you said, what do women talk about, that's one of the things that the women I talk with, one of the kinds of things we talk about. Another thing that we talk about is, I've sort of posted in the Freudian...
Well, before we go on to the next thing...
How is it different from what men talk about?
I would like to get just some clearer idea of what this spiritualism, or wherever it is. You compare it to some kind of traditional religion, and I'm just wondering whether it's religion or whether it's something else.
It isn't religion in the sense religion historically has been a codified, structured, rigid kind of form within which people are fit. So there is no feminist religion per se, because endemic in feminism is the idea of fluidity and each person going within their own process, and so no one is establishing a feminist church. But the only reason I use the word religion is it connotes something beyond the, quote, rational, unquote, realm. I mean, beyond what you can hold and see has been often called religion. So I don't want to confuse people by thinking that what I'm talking about particularly is to set up a feminist church. What I am talking about is all that is in that realm, for me, very personally, was cut off, and now it's being reopened by talking with women who are interested in that, with a lot of publications that are coming out in the feminist movement now that are, and the quality of that has a lot to do with life connectedness to going back into the ancients in terms of, and Carol knows a lot about this, in terms of what were their rebellions about, what were the witches' rebellions about, what kind of strengths did those women have that we should appreciate. But it's not only oriented toward the past, it's a basis from which to be very visionary about the future in more than a practical political kind of way, that we're going to break down sex role stereotyping.
I remember I was talking to you the other day, Carol, and we talked about that a little bit, I think, and it seemed to me that the impression I got from what you were saying is that perhaps a better word, at least a better word for me, in order to understand it better, was that this was less a spiritualist kind of thing in the traditional notion of that word, but a kind of revolutionary psychology. That is an attempt to look inside people in a different way than the rationalist patriarchal culture has allowed us to do, and to understand that a little bit more, and without, putting it on some sort of level where it's simply some sort of vague feeling, and that it isn't capable of being understood.
Oh, it's very capable of being understood. It's not, nobody's capable of verbalizing it yet. That's the problem. One of the things, there are so many names for it. It's a feeling of, the spirituality is a feeling of knowing that you're there, the feeling of authenticity that we all have at times in our life, that sort of expands, the moment of time expands, and we really know where we are and what we're doing, and we really feel all together with our body and our mind. And that's kind of a spiritual experience we've been talking about. It's a clarity, knowing who you are. It's and knowing what's happening, knowing that you have control or you don't have control. It's also remembering. We have a lot of things in our mind that we don't ever remember, and it's not just our childhood experiences. We remember, like a lot more. We remember things we've just heard. And going back to it, it sounds, like you get into this. The problem with trying to verbalize it is you're always going to sound like a crazy person, and Jan had that experience too, right? So I usually only talk about it to people who are into it too, and then they go, "Yes, I know what you mean," and then we know we have some kind of communication going. If someone doesn't know what I mean, I'm going to sound very crazy to them because I'm going to get more desperate as I try to explain it, and go far off the track. And
well, let me just ask.
I think I've got.
Let me just ask Doris whether she understands it, because I think we talked about this.
I don't know that I do. I haven't I haven't spent much time reading about this. I've been traveling, and I am aware that spirituality and matriarchal religion, or whatever you want to call it, is something that seems to be of interest to women all across the country, but I really don't know much about it myself.
Well, do you share any kind of feeling or sense that the kinds of things that Jan and Carol are talking about are operative in your life, whether you understand it or not? That there's some sort of thing that can happen to you inside as a person that's part of relating to other women, that this thing means?
Oh, I've definitely had spiritual experiences relating with other women, no doubt about that. Whether that's something men don't experience, I would never be able to know.
I think trying to stay on the more the topic of female bonding, from which this experience often for me comes, and that's what I want to tie it back with, is that my theory, for instance, of transcendence is that transcendence is any pure kind of experience. Like orgasm can be transcendent in its physical purity, or you can be transcendent over some of the craziest things if it is a very pure experience. And that's part of lesbian separatism. If you are with women who are all committed to the same general goal, or even committed to the lesbian lifestyle per se, it doesn't have to go into that all our visions are the same, because they aren't, then there is something larger. If there are 10 people there, then there is something larger than all the sum of our presence there. There's something larger than all our presence there. And in that special kind of energy, I think, that comes from this special kind of bonding, there's almost something often transcendent. There's certainly something often that's pleasurable, if I want to get off the transcendent and spirituality kind of thing and down to something that maybe some people can. We're taking this off on what is, as Carol said, very hard to verbalize. I wanted to say a little bit about it because it is so important, a development out of radical feminism now. For me personally, I've gotten a great deal of joy out of opening up my head and letting it, fly. And the places that I often open up my head in that kind of way are listening to some women's new music, Lou Crimmins, Kay Gardner. Sometimes women sing songs, like Lou Crimmins sings a song where she cries to her mother in the song. And it is just so moving that it moves you almost to a different kind of experience, one that you have a memory of experiencing sometime, maybe not even in your physical past, maybe in some other pass. It's all, very ethereal. Sometimes in reading Mary Daly or people who write about the courage of women, that there is something essentially very joyous about it at the very least. And I have this quote that kind of explains, I think, some of the things we were talking about a few minutes ago in the transcendence. It's within our circles come the triggers that allow us to remember. We know the chant a split second before the priestess begins. We move in concert when we have never danced together before. We learn archaic runes and read them in our dreams. We trust our instincts and intuition as we never did before. We divine within a cauldron's flames, and suddenly we know that we are elemental and thereby infinite. We need to be together so that we can remember our old ascendancy, our art, our magic, our roots, to relearn our healing natures, to re-experience pure joy and pleasure. And what I would really like to talk about is the healing quality of women being together and the pleasure of women being together. And Carol has a very interesting theory on pleasure, I know.
Oh, my theory is that women invented pleasure, and that men were not able to experience it in the same way that women were able to. And one of the things we're in the process of doing is reinventing pleasure at this time, and that's what the change from some political lesbians going over to being cultural lesbians, or staying in both camps, or just women who have never been interested in any kind of movement thing before coming out in a kind of cultural way and inventing pleasure and inventing our own culture, which was there before, but we have to remember it and we have to improve on it.
What some of this sounds like to me, as somebody who's new to these ideas, is that, well, there are two ways that I could look at it. One is that by being together as women, you are discovering something in yourselves as human beings that you never were able to discover before. Or you are discovering some kind of basic femaleness or female principle that exists. Now the question is which or both of those things, or none of them for that matter. I mean, am I on some kind of a track
Well,
here?
women were never human beings. Women, and I still don't think they're human beings because, I'm sorry, did I?
Oh, that's all right. I'm interested. I'm listening. I'm trying to learn too.
Women weren't accepted as human beings. Human beings were men, hence the whole male pronoun and concept of everything as male, except those, kind of cuddly things they wanted to consider females. Women are in the process of discovering themselves as women without having that kind of intermediary step of being human beings. And I think women aren't going to give up being women just to be a human being, because to be a human being is not so very much. Human beings have, destroyed the earth and polluted the air, and they make their they kill people a lot. They kill a lot of people.
I never want to be a human being.
Yeah, I couldn't stand being a human being. So I'm not into human beings at all. Women discovering themselves as women is a whole other thing, because, just through personal experience, I know that before I came out, before I was a feminist, before I was a lesbian, I thought I was invisible. I mean, if someone wasn't in the room looking at me and talking to me, usually a man, because that made you even more valid. If some man was there to tell you that you were there, I never experienced myself as a human being or a woman or as an anything.
I think that's an important part of the
being
process
with
we
women.
were talking about, which is one, that invisibility you were talking about is the very first step of women facing how alien we are in the culture.
Absolutely.
And that's what everybody, I believe, is in the process of doing. And once you recognize the full extent of that this isn't our world, it isn't our country, we're not Americans, we're not Christians, we're not anything except women trying to find out what's authentic about ourselves. And in answer to your question, I don't know if there is a female principle. My instincts say that there are, and that's the only way we can answer, because we haven't been given enough room or space, and we're trying to take it in every way we know how to be able to answer those kinds of questions for ourselves. But once you recognize the alienation, then you recognize that anyone that alien has got to be very damaged by that alienation. And that the second step, I think, is recognizing how much we have to heal ourselves and how much we have to heal other women, which calls for a lot of patience. It calls for the fact that we understand some of our anger. What do we do with it? Can we project it towards someone who is obviously very damaged by the fact that they're also an alien in this culture. You know, so these are some of the major kinds of, or that's one of the major kinds of questions about how healing can I be within this culture that we're trying to develop. What am I naturally healing, or do I have to learn how to be? A woman I'm saying, for instance, I think is naturally healing, and I'm an apprentice, which I'm learning how to be healing, because I've been very removed from any of my healing powers, or even sense of myself as being a healing kind of human being.
But what does healing mean exactly?
Well, I think it means, one, recognizing that we're all in the, so this is somebody else's phrase, the cripple club, that women have been in some ways very crippled by our alienation. And the beauty of it is watching women become uncrippled. And that's part of the transcendent kind of experience almost, is to see a mother and daughter, for instance. Carol has a daughter, and sometimes in just watching them relate in a way that I never could have related to my mother is healing to see that it can exist. I think it's healing for them to be able to have a relationship that challenges almost the patriarchy in terms of what the patriarchy has said relationships between mothers and daughters should be.
Part of it is the agony. You haven't talked about that.
And the
only person who can hurt
Yeah.
you is a woman. I mean, who can really hurt you and tear you apart, and that's what we tear ourselves apart over too.
I think, like Doris is a very healing person. I'm beginning to identify who the more healing kind of women are, who can give without being so self-sacrificing that they destroy themselves. You know, how much can you do that? And I know about the program that you're involved in, that you've been healing to a lot of women. I don't know if you want to talk about that. I'm learning massage, and that touch and connectedness and communication through massage is a healing thing with women. So it can be both on a physical level and on just a sharing emotional kind of level.
In any case, I think what you're saying, apart from some of the kind of abstractions involved in it, is that by relating to other women in the kind of intense way that you have been relating, you're finding out certain things about yourself that you really enjoy, that you really are in a process of discovery, and that's the benefit of it. And so if we could get, at this point, into some of the more personal kinds of things, perhaps if we could. Doris, I wonder, apart from the abstractions, which you seem to be a little bit uncomfortable with, I'm sure, though, that you have found...
I'm not uncomfortable with abstractions.
Well, in any case, maybe we could get down to a little bit more concrete level in terms of what you feel the kinds of association that you've had with women in a separate way have done for you personally.
Well, I think it was Liza Cowan one night on a radio show talked about relationships she had had with men and how she woke up and realized that she was the one that was always giving and they were always taking. Like she would buy a present and she would get a whole pleasure out of doing that, but then she began to notice that they never did that for her. And I can't recall in my experiences, though I haven't had many relationships with men, ever coming across any men who were giving, thoughtful, caring, nurturing, if you want to call it that. And that has been my experience with women.
All women?
All women. Certainly, most of the women that I've known, yeah, in one way or another, are giving and nurturing, even if they're terribly cruel in other ways, maybe through ignorance, whatever. I don't know. But
you see, I'm just wondering if it isn't, whether you're discovering as you relate to women that there's some kind of basic thing that all women share, of the sort that you've just talked about, or are you perhaps discovering that there are different kinds of women and that all women in the past have been told that they must be loving, giving, nurturing, and men have been told that they're not supposed to be. And I know that, for instance, I'm in a situation where I'm relating very largely with men, and I'm discovering how much I want to be a giving, loving, nurturing person. And it's something that I'm trying to develop in myself, and I see how our culture has prevented me from discovering that part of myself. But I don't think that all men are like that, basically, and nor do I think that all women are like that.
Well, to some extent, I've had some of those same experiences, Ron, because I've always related to women, but I was very much into role-playing, and I was playing the butch role. So I knew what the experience was of always being the taker, of accepting the nurturing, but not returning it. you know. And so I've found out, since I've, you know, outgrown my role playing, you know, what a joy it can be to be a giving person, to have an equal kind of relationship. You know.
But do you find that perhaps the way you can give as a person is perhaps not exactly the way some other women can give? I mean, you talk about being thoughtful, being loving. I see that in some women, and I see a certain other kind of thing in other women, a kind of strength, a kind of protectiveness, a kind of leadership quality that may not be the same thing. And I'm just wondering whether women, as they get together, are beginning to see not just the similarities between women, but the differences between them that have been pushed aside in our society.
I think a lot of women are forced to give. You know, we're conditioned to give. And so a lot of women give in ways that they wouldn't naturally give. And part of the thing of women getting together is to start stripping away those old ways of giving, like always be waiting at the door with your slippers kind of thing, and getting into things that are more meaningful to them and that they want to give. We all can only give exactly what we want. We don't feel like giving all the time. We feel like taking sometimes. Sometimes we just feel like being alone. And that's the unheard of sin for a woman. I think, you know, nobody has yet listened to a room of one's own. I really don't. Even women together, females bonding, do not allow each other the space to be together and yet to be alone when they need to. I think women, at this time, I know I have a feeling and a need to be with someone, but I also have this great yearning to be alone and still know that I haven't isolated myself from my community, that I still have people who love me and who care about me, and that it's not one of those things that as soon as I walk out of my door, everyone has to come up and love me, but that it's a normal thing to want to be alone, you know, that it's a natural thing, and that it's something everybody else, I think, has a feeling for, too.
Has this kind of thing, this kind of discovery of what you need for yourself come to you more now that you've, you know, is this something that you've discovered about
Everything's
yourself?
Everything's come to me more now since I've been bonding with women. I really, you know, I think I was saying it before, we were trying to pinpoint how our lives have changed or what particular thing in our life has changed, and my whole life has changed. There's nothing that is the same. I think differently. I have a wonderful quote from my myth-making article by Emily Culpepper, I believe it is.
In the second wave.
In the second wave, which almost every lesbian in the world should have. Volume 4, number 1.
Ooh,
I have it. I can
Right,
buy it.
yes, wonderful. It has something, a quote from Phyllis Chesler. I was going to use as my rationale, which I couldn't think of one before, on myth-making. But this is Barbara Starrett, and on a fantasy about future possibilities. I'm an old woman with a deck of cards, a witch, an Amazon, a gorgon, a seer, a clairvoyant, a poet. I have visions of becoming, and I dream in female. That's, you know, that's really nice, and that's something I'm starting to do, because I can't say I dream in female now, but I'm starting to go toward that point, and it's very pleasurable. I can't imagine ever being like I was again, though I know I am the same person. Yet I did a lot of things that were more or less socially acceptable because of the role that I thought I had to play. Because I was just as locked into my role as you were in yours.
I could say about that I guess Ron had asked me this before, so I tried really to decide what concrete changes beyond the kind of changes that you're talking about. And I heard a quote that I thought was interesting. I'm becoming the person I wanted to marry. Which has to do with boldness and a kind of confidence and resourcefulness that I wanted to find in another person that I'm really finding in myself. And besides that, in more concrete terms, sexually, the discoveries I've made about myself, I don't know how I ever would have made with men. I knew lots of men before I came out about 4 years ago. And my sense of my own sexuality now, and from very technical ways to very ways that would be difficult to describe, is so much more profound. And I was thinking today that I have at least 30, if not 40 or 50 more years of sexuality left, and that my sexuality really only began 4 years ago, and that's a very exciting concept to me. Before, in also very concrete terms, I used to feel very ugly, and I occasionally felt attractive, and now I feel beautiful almost all the time and occasionally ugly. I never thought of myself as a creative person before. I was very resistant to thinking about myself as a creative person, and now I very much conceive of myself as an artist in all kinds of ways. Before, I used to get my identity from my job very strongly and from whatever my male lover status was. I still have a lot of identity problems, but I'm much more moving toward getting my identity from, one, my own accomplishments. Even if they're not recognized, I can get a source of strength from my accomplishments and be convinced that I'm doing something right, even if the world isn't, or even the lesbian community doesn't approve of some of my theories or actions or politics. And until recently, I still tried to get a lot of identity from lover relationships with women, and that was deadly. And I'm moving more and more away from that, although I still have some problems with that. That I see a light at the end of the tunnel, I think, in achieving my full sense of identity fully from myself.
Well, when you talk about accomplishments, I mean, one of the things that seems to me to be one of the cornerstones of the patriarchal culture is that one's identity usually is measured by one's accomplishments, one's success in some kind of competitive male world. And I see a lot of women who are, moving into that world headlong and adopting, it seems to me at least, the same kinds of success-oriented notions of who they are. I wonder if that's true for you or any of you, and whether that's
we're not exactly
that,
sex-oriented, success-oriented.
I'm just wondering whether the kinds of things that women are discovering are past that. What are accomplishments in a real world that you'd like to find for yourselves, rather than the kinds of accomplishments that we think of in the current culture?
I think if I can be a nurturing person, that's a considerable accomplishment. I'm no longer very interested in success in the patriarchal terms. I know the women that you're speaking of, and I hope that it's a process for them too, although we have had long discussions about what kind of skills do women need to gain, so that, well, I keep thinking of the Freudian question about what do women want, and the question I came up with, the answer I came up recently, is that we want the world back. That we once had very different positions in this world, and that we were the guides of civilization, and that we want to become the guide. I want to become a guide of the civilization again, and that there's certain skills I need, and I'll go into the patriarchy for those, but that success in patriarchal terms is very ugly to me now. I don't want to be a bank president anymore. I don't want to be president of an advertising agency anymore. I find that very life negative, so that anything I do that calls forth courage from me, and courage that's oriented toward life, is an accomplishment. And anything that is not in that direction is a backslide. But that's how I would register my progress and my success, and in how authentic I can become. I think it was in Nightwood that somebody says one's life is particularly one's own. Juna Barnes had said, one's life is particularly one's own when one has invented it. And every time I invent something new about my life that seems authentic to me, that is an extraordinary success.
Right.
Do you feel the same way? I mean, if
I do. I feel very much like that. I think one of the big things that happened to me in my life was when I got in touch with the idea of wanting to be one of the people, one of the people. And that didn't mean, part of a shivering mass or something. It meant a distinct individual who's making their contribution, and sometimes excelling or being something specific, and sometimes being unrecognizable because of so many other people,
Well, how does all this?
There's a kind of feeling that I like, and that I'm engaged in a search for indefinable things, and I also know that there are a lot of other people engaged in searches for other kinds of things or the same things, and I feel very comfortable with that feeling. I don't, I know that in some ways I will excel, but I might be the only person who knew about it. But it doesn't bother me anymore.
Well,
it really doesn't.
How do these things, because I identify a lot with what you're saying, because I think I'm going through a similar kind of thing. But one of the things that I think about sometimes is and I came out of a political bag too, as you probably know, and I'm wonders, okay, I begin to see that the important things are developing myself as a person and trying to find out who I am, and those are my accomplishments. Okay, then how do you stop people from stepping on your head as a woman? How do you stop people from stepping on your head as a lesbian? One of the things I found by running into the great patriarchy and trying to spread the truth is that all I got from my pains was anguish, and that I still want to change the world, but I've come around to the notion that the way to change is by changing myself first.
I think there are two things to that, Ron. One is that
being
you're talking
one
in
of the
very
people,
binary
very
terms. You're saying you're either political or cultural in that sense. And I still step back in for political acts, but I feel in some ways like I've done my time politically. I've given 3 or 4 years concentrated of my life to civil rights struggles, to feminism. I still, like with the Feminist Community Coalition and other actions, am a political person. But one of the other ways about self-indulgence that we haven't talked, about getting back into yourself that we haven't talked about, and that's becoming very important to me recently, is the mind-body dichotomy, which is very patriarchal, and that my head has been split, my political head has been split off from my body, and a lot of, not talking in sexual terms, but in my sense of the wholeness of myself for a long time. And one of the other important parts of radical feminism and feminism that I'm seeing is, it's kind of fun, it's the idea that feminists say we're going to save the world, which we are, if somebody will give us about an inch, or if we take the inch, but that often we're very cruel to our own bodies. And I read recently somebody was talking about taking better care of your goddess farm, which is your body, that you're growing a goddess, was one way of describing it, and that you should be kinder to yourself. So in very even physical terms, whether it's eating better or exercising or remembering things, some of our remembering rituals, I'm beginning to get tied back into one whole person again, and that's a very important part of my time and energy right now, is devoted to reconnecting my mind and my body into one whole responsive person. And that I only have time for some kinds of politics now. And the question of how do you survive if no one is doing those politics, I think other people are in that process, and that they will ultimately step into places. And I know a lot of women now who are just becoming political, let's say, who haven't been political before, and hopefully they'll do some of that kind of work. I feel like I'm doing other kinds of work that's extremely political. It's just not in the context that you and I and Doris and Carol also with Cowrie have worked in what is consciously seen as political. That every action of mine is extraordinarily political, whether it's United Feathers in our beach party or whatever.
I definitely have that sense too. Definitely. As a matter of fact, I think the danger of being too political in the old sense of the word is that you get very caught up in trying to get various institutions, all patriarchal, to recognize you and yield so that you feel that you have made some accomplishment or something like that. And
it's an impossible goal, really, to get the patriarchy to recognize you.
That's a lot of what lesbian separatism is about, is
right.
that even if it isn't on a conscious level, there is an awareness underneath that really isn't the road to go. That you have to
it's very,
create some alternative.
But isn't it true that
right.
rather than try to make pitiful little changes in the mess that exists?
Isn't it true, though, that if there hadn't been a women's movement, and if there hadn't been a gay movement, that the chances of people like you getting together and trying to find out the more personal, more important to you now things would have been harder to do? I mean, one of the things I think about is people listening to this show, and where do they go, for example, to talk to other women, to begin to explore the kinds of things that you people are exploring. There have to be. Can they just do that by just sitting down with some other women they know, or are there places that they can go to?
I think the best
to meet
resource,
people?
if we're going to get
Well,
very
there are plenty of
practical.
places they can go. Yeah, they can go to Lesbian Feminist Liberation. That's a very important organization. I had some incredible experiences in that group, which changed my life.
But isn't that a more political organization than the sort
No,
that,
it's both political and social.
Everything is political. Anytime lesbians get together, there's something political about it, I guarantee it. Because the political thing that's happening that's most important, I think, is our changes inside ourselves, and not whether we pass a law or something like that. It's how we feel about ourselves, you know. Then we live our lives differently. And
but it's hard for people to do that by themselves. And what I'm trying to get at is
a community is essential.
How does a woman who's listening to this program who doesn't know any
I
other
think it's very
lesbians and
simple.
thinking this way, where do they go and how do they find something?
Majority
Get a copy of
Report
Majority
is
Report, right.
is sold at almost most major newsstands, and in it has every resource available within the feminist and lesbian feminist communities. And to just read one or two issues of that, I think you can pick out the kind of organization that you feel most comfortable in. And there's everything across the spectrum. I was talking about the Feminist Coalition. There's 65 feminist identified organizations in New York City, from everything from Jewish feminists to black feminists to anarchist feminists to National Organization for Women, which is a very good entry place for a lot of women. And it's where I started, and I gained a lot of really rich experience from the National Organization for Women. And Lesbian Feminist Liberation. And in Majority Report, every day there are 23 feminist-oriented kinds of things happening, from self-help clinics to more very highly intellectual theory-oriented kinds of groups. So I think that answers the question. It is really the answer to the question of where do women go. I think they choose for themselves where they go by virtue of seeing what kind of selection of groups they have.
Do you think that there's some special thing that lesbian feminists are thinking about and doing and contributing to the world that just plain old feminists are not doing? Is it possible for a woman to get the kind of awareness and consciousness in a strictly feminist group without getting together with other lesbians or with lesbians?
One thing lesbians are doing that I like a lot is they're helping to destroy the old humanitarian foundations that a lot of things have been built on, and which imply, there's a lot of guilt and humanitarian kinds of feelings. It's like, at one point I wanted to go around with a magic fairy wand and say, you're not guilty for Vietnam, and you're not guilty for war, and you're not guilty for, people starving to death, because women haven't been guilty, women haven't done anything. And I think they're starting, it's part of separatism,
some
too.
People feel guilty for not doing it.
Well, that's, women aren't in power. So, and the people who are in power are men, and they are restrained from doing anything. They can only do things in a very, very low level, which is really nice, because then they can put all their energy into that, and men can go out and destroy it again. But I think that's part of separatism, too, is women getting together and starting to think of themselves almost exclusively. And when they start thinking of themselves, they get into other things, like women in communes are really into ecology. They want to save themselves, they want to save the earth, and then they, it's a chain that goes on and on and on, where your interests are. And women aren't naturally just going to sit around and hug themselves and say, like, I'm just terrific and I've just got to save myself. All the women that I've met are always reaching out for something. They want something. They have so many desires, and they are constantly reaching out, and this is part of our conflict, because part of the desires are conditioned, by the way we grew up, that we're supposed to want certain things, and if we don't want that and we want something else, then we have a lot of conflict. But women are constantly reaching out, and they're helping themselves first now, and then the things that they're interested in. Humanitarianism is very bad for women.
Well, I take it that you're saying that, at least at this point in history, it is important for women to think of their own needs and to do that.
It's imperative.
And to make their own discoveries as to what they want.
Absolutely. Who is going to tell us if we don't tell ourselves?
Is there a future for relationship, for well, maybe not humanitarianism, but humanism,
Well, what is humanism then? We have to get into that, and that's a whole other thing.
Humanism cannot exist in a patriarchy. Men and women cannot be equal, as many humanists. I've heard a lot of wonderful humanist debates with radical feminists, and the humanists rarely do very well because their basic presumption is equality within a patriarchy, equality of men and women within the existing institutions, which is insane because all the institutions of the culture, from religion to education to whatever, are thoroughly the result of male thinking. And one of the things that lesbian feminists are doing that's prophetic for the culture. We're doing many things, I think, but one of the things is even getting into the whole nature of thinking. Do women think more in a circular kind of sense? There are investigations of the right brain, left brain kind of concept. The left brain is analytical, the right brain is more creative, the left brain is been associated with male thinking. How do we begin to use that part of our thinking processes that we've been cut off from for a long time? The results of a lot of this probing could result in totally different patterns of people relating internally to themselves and certainly to the world, and it's far beyond sex role stereotyping. You had said in your introduction that one of our major problems was that we live in a patriarchy. I see the fact that we live in a patriarchy to be our major problem, not one of them. I can't think of any problem I have that's not related to the fact that I'm living under a male-dominated isn't even a big enough word anymore, male-designed culture.
You're living in a predatory community. That's what you're living in, and you're not the predator.
Yeah, and as Les Shanklin would say, a warrior culture.
Yes, I like that very much.
The thing is that I agree with everything you're saying. And what the only thing that bothers me about it, of course, is that one can assign that to what you call male thinking, because I don't think that way. I don't want to think that way, and I know a lot of other men who don't think that way.
Are they gay?
Well, I
most
think
of
the
them
people
are,
that are most motivated
and
to
that
change
is,
are the people who are the most oppressed by it, and those happen to be women.
Well, there's no question about that. But what I think, at least my interpretation of what I hear there, and I sort of don't like to bring myself into it, but I guess I will at this point, is that when you say male thinking, what I think you really mean is just rotten, ignorant, immoral thinking.
No, I mean male thinking.
And okay, I mean, say that if you want to, but just let me finish. I think that it's absolutely essential for women to get together and discover the kinds of things they're discovering in order to change the world. I think that women will.
And in order to have pleasure, our only goal isn't to change the world.
Right.
Our first goal is to have a lot of fun.
Change the world so we can live comfortably.
And as we're enjoying real, authentic kinds of pleasures in ourselves, that if the day when two women, for instance, can really love each other is the day that the revolution will have been accomplished, because you have two self-hating people together in a patriarchy. Women have been taught that they're contemptible within the culture. And the day that I can be truly loving with another woman and authentically loving, then that's the day that we would have achieved this revolution. And so the process that we're in, that's another reason of the importance of the lesbian feminist quest, or whatever you would want to call it.
That would be true. And I find that absolutely true, that day will mean that we've accomplished the revolution, but it also, implicit in your statement, is that it's possible for men and women to love each other, and I don't think that's true.
How is that implicit?
I mean, I think that people don't love each other, and when we can discover how to love each other, then we'll win. And maybe the only way we can is by doing that as gay men and as lesbians, because we're too hung up in a society that's told us how we're supposed to be as men and women. But saying that all of these ignorant and immoral things that you're talking about are the products of male thinking doesn't seem to me to solve the problem.
But they are, because you can't separate it out.
Society is the products of male thinking because men devised it. Now,
we have to think of where they devised it out of.
And you have to think of where didn't have a hand in creating the kinds of societies that we have today.
Men hate women, and they hate men who act like women or in some way take any kind of woman's role or relate to other men as a man and woman kind of couple. I mean, they
You mean
hate
as
women.
people?
I mean, all these right-thinking men who are the heads of nations and the heads of churches and all through the years hate women. They have taught everyone to hate women.
Let's go
So
back to the
anyone- so you
primal
can't
reason
say-
why men would do this.
Yeah, well, you can't say, I'm just talking about, you can't say that it's not male thinking, it's immoral or corrupt or evil thinking or anything like that. It is male thinking because it comes from that, from hating women. Now, why men hate women, there are a lot of different theories on it. You know, there are a lot of different, I personally like the theory of men and women being different species. I like that a lot. And that's something I would like to go with later, which I haven't explored.
I'm afraid you're not going to get a chance because we got about 2 minutes left. So maybe we could sort of try to wind up with at least some more of a very specific kind of, if we can, personal statement from each of you of just where you are in terms of how important it's been for you to relate to other women as opposed to where you might have been, before you got into that. If we could end with that.
Yeah. Well, with me, once I was touched with the idea of feminism and began to question all the things that you would question when you come in contact with feminist thought, it set off a chain reaction, and I began to question everything, every conditioning that I could be aware of. Every time my instinct began to not feel comfortable with what I had always accepted, I began to examine it. And so this has set me into a whole area of examining the kind of government we live with, and how can feminism or how can a lesbian live in that kind of society? And I've realized that they really can't, and that it has to be changed. And so it set me on. I'm now an anarchist, and I wish we had time to explain anarchism because it isn't, irresponsibility or anything like that. But it's, I believe in the neutralization of power rather than the grasping of power. I think when people learn that it's in their interest to refuse power and only to maintain power over their own lives, that then we will be able to love each other.
Could we end on that note, because we really don't have the time? And I want to thank you all very much. My guests today have been Jan Crawford, Carol Hardin, and Doris Lunden, and the subject has been lesbian separatism.